The sound of a pistol shot split the morning air as Nora Patterson ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. She had always known her father was a cruel man, but she never imagined he would send armed men after her when she fled from the arranged marriage he had forced upon her. At 20 years old, Nora had decided her life was her own, not a bargaining chip to settle her father's gambling debts with the aging cattle baron who had chosen her as his fifth bride. "Miss Patterson," a gruff voice called out. "Your father wants you home, and Mr. Thornton is waitin' to make you his wife. No sense in running." Nora bit her lip to keep from crying out in frustration. The town of Silverdale, Colorado, in 1878, was supposed to be her chance at freedom, not another prison. She peered over the edge of the trough, spotting the 3 men her father had sent combing through the dusty main street. The early morning hour meant few witnesses were about, which was both blessing and curse. "I need to get to the stables," she whispered to herself, adjusting the small satchel containing her meager possessions. Her carefully saved money would buy her passage on the eastbound train, if only she could reach it. As she prepared to make a dash for the alley between the general store and the saloon, a shadow fell over her. Nora froze, slowly raising her eyes to meet the gaze of a tall man in a worn leather duster. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could see the curious expression in his eyes. "You seem to be in a bit of trouble, miss," he said quietly, crouching down beside her. "Please," Nora whispered urgently, "I cannot go back. They want to force me to marry a man old enough to be my grandfather." The stranger's jaw tightened. Nobody should be forced into marriage. He peered over the trough, assessing the situation. "Those men work for your father?" "Yes, and for Thornton. If they catch me, they won't," he said with calm certainty. "I'm Yates Porter, and I believe I can help you." Nora studied his face, searching for deceit, but finding only determination. His skin was tanned from long days under the sun, and his eyes were the color of the sky after a storm. Something about his quiet confidence made her want to trust him, despite everything she had learned about the unreliability of men. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. A faint smile touched his lips. "Because it's the right thing to do." He reached into his coat and withdrew a second pistol, checking it briefly before tucking it back away. "When I give the signal, run for the stables. I'll create a distraction." Before Nora could ask what sort of distraction he planned, Yates stood and stepped into the street, his posture relaxed as if he hadn't a care in the world. He sauntered toward the saloon, calling out cheerfully to the men searching for her. "Morning, gentlemen. Fine day for a hunt. Though I'm curious what sort of prey requires 3 armed men in town." The men turned toward him, momentarily forgetting their search. Nora saw her chance and darted into the alley, keeping low and moving as quietly as possible. Behind her, she heard Yates continuing to engage the men in conversation, his voice deliberately loud to cover any sound she might make. She reached the back of the stables and slipped inside, the familiar smell of hay and horses greeting her. The stable boy, barely 16, looked up in surprise. "Miss Patterson, your pa's men are—" "Please, Tom, don't tell them I'm here," she begged. "I need the fastest horse you have." Tom hesitated, glancing toward the stable doors. "They said you're to be married to Mr. Thornton. It's a good match, ain't it? He's the richest man in the county." "He's a monster who has buried 4 wives already," Nora hissed. "Please, Tom, I helped you when your sister was sick. I'm asking for your help now." The boy's face softened, and he nodded, leading her to a stall where a sleek chestnut mare stood. "Take Penny. She's the fastest we got." Nora quickly saddled the horse, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She had just finished tightening the cinch when the stable doors burst open. She whirled around, expecting to face her father's men, but instead found Yates Porter closing the doors behind him. "We need to move quickly," he said, moving toward another stall. "They didn't believe my story for long." "What did you tell them?" Nora asked, leading Penny out. "That I saw a woman matching your description heading for the church." He grinned as he prepared his own mount, a powerful black gelding. "Bought us maybe 5 minutes before they realize I lied." Tom looked between them nervously. "Mr. Patterson will have my hide if he finds out I helped." "Tell him she held you at gunpoint," Yates suggested, tossing the boy a silver dollar. "That should convince him." The boy caught the coin with a grateful nod. There's a trail behind the livery that leads to Widow Jenkins' property. It'll keep you off the main road for a spell. Thank you, Tom, Nora said, mounting Penny with practiced ease. Despite her father's controlling nature, he had never been able to stop her from riding, one of the few freedoms she had managed to maintain. Yates swung into his saddle. Ready? Nora nodded, adjusting her skirts. Where are we going? My family has a ranch about 30 miles northwest of here. We'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next. Tom opened the back doors of the stable. Better hurry. I hear them coming. Yates and Nora urged their horses forward, breaking into a gallop as soon as they cleared the buildings. The trail Tom had mentioned was narrow but well-worn, winding through a stand of pine trees before opening onto rolling grassland. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Yates signaled for them to slow down. Nora's heart was still racing, though whether from the exertion or the fear of capture, she couldn't be sure. She glanced over her shoulder, relieved to see no sign of pursuit. Do you think we lost them? She asked, catching her breath. Yates nodded, patting his gelding's neck. For now, but your father doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily. He isn't, Nora confirmed grimly. Once he sets his mind to something, he's like a bulldog with a bone. What's the story there? Yates asked, guiding his horse alongside hers as they continued at a more moderate pace. Most fathers want their daughters to marry well, but forcing you to wed a man you clearly fear seems extreme. Nora's hands tightened on the reins. My father owes Thornton money, a lot of money. The marriage would settle the debt. And Thornton, she shuddered. He's buried for wives already. The last one was only 19. They say she fell down the stairs, but everyone knows what really happened. Yates's expression darkened. And the law does nothing? Thornton owns the sheriff, Nora said bitterly. He owns half the county. My father told me I had no choice, that it was either marry Thornton or watch our ranch be taken and my father thrown in debtor's prison. So you ran. She lifted her chin. I would rather starve on my own terms than die at the hands of that man. Yates studied her with newfound respect. That takes courage. Or desperation, she replied. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing as they moved into more rugged terrain. Nora found herself stealing glances at her unexpected rescuer. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet confidence that didn't tip into the arrogance she had come to expect from men in positions of power. Why did you really help me? She asked finally. You don't know me. You could have just walked away. Yates was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. My sister was forced into a marriage 5 years ago. Her husband was a cruel man who hurt her badly. By the time we found out and got her away from him, the damage was done. She took her own life 6 months later. Nora's breath caught. I'm so sorry. So am I, he said softly. I promised myself I'd never stand by and let another woman suffer that fate if I could help it. The sun climbed higher as they continued their journey, stopping briefly at a creek to rest the horses and drink. Nora splashed cool water on her face, trying to wash away the dust and fear of the morning's events. How much farther to your ranch? She asked, settling on a rock near the water's edge. We should be there by late afternoon, Yates replied, refilling their canteens. My parents and younger brother will be there. They're good people. You'll be safe. Nora nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. And then what? My father won't stop looking. He can't afford to with what he owes Thornton. First things first, Yates said practically. We get you somewhere safe, then we figure out a more permanent solution. We? Nora raised an eyebrow. You've already done more than enough, Mr. Porter. I can't ask you to further involve yourself in my troubles. Yates, he corrected. And you didn't ask. I offered. Something in his steady gaze made Nora's cheeks warm, and she looked away, busying herself with adjusting her boots. It had been a long time since anyone had offered her help without expecting something in return. They mounted up again and continued their journey, the terrain becoming increasingly hilly. Yates pointed out landmarks as they rode a distinctive rock formation, an old trapper's cabin, a bend in the river that marked the boundary of Porterland. Your family must have been here a long time, Nora observed. My grandfather claimed this land after the war. Built everything from scratch, Yates said with evident pride. We run about 300 head of cattle now, plus some horses. My mother's family had a horse farm in Kentucky, Nora said, nostalgia coloring her voice, before she married my father and moved west. I used to dream of having my own stables someday. What stopped you? Nora laughed without humor. My father. After my mother died, he decided a woman's place was in the home, not running a business. He sold all but a few of our horses and focused on cattle instead. Your mother taught you to ride, I take it, and to train horses, Nora said, patting Penny's neck affectionately. She said a woman should always have skills no one can take away from her. Wise woman, Yates commented. They crested a hill, and Nora caught her first glimpse of the Porter ranch spread out below them. A large two-story house stood at the center, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a substantial barn. Smoke rose from the chimney, and even from a distance, Nora could see figures moving about, signs of a working ranch in full operation. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. Yates smiled, the first full smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing a light to his eyes that made Nora's breath catch. It's home, he said simply. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She waved when she recognized Yates, then called over her shoulder to someone inside. By the time they reached the yard, an older man and a younger one who bore a striking resemblance to Yates had joined her. Didn't expect you back so soon, the older man said as Yates dismounted. He eyed Nora curiously. Who's your friend? Pa, Ma, Daniel. This is Nora Patterson, Yates said, helping Nora down from her horse. She's in some trouble and needs a safe place to stay for a while. Mrs. Porter stepped forward immediately, her kind face creasing with concern. You poor dear, you look exhausted. Come inside and rest. We can talk over supper. I don't want to impose, Nora began, but Mrs. Porter was already taking her arm. Nonsense. Any friend of Yates is welcome here. Mr. Porter and Daniel took charge of the horses, while Mrs. Porter led Nora into the house. It was warm and inviting, with well-worn furniture that spoke of comfort rather than luxury. Nora was shown to a small bedroom on the second floor, where a basin of clean water and fresh towels awaited. This is my daughter Sarah's room, but she's married and living in Denver now, Mrs. Porter explained. You rest. I'll call you when supper's ready. Left alone, Nora sank onto the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. She had escaped for now, but her father and Thornton wouldn't give up easily. She was still turning over possibilities in her mind when exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep. When she woke, the light outside had shifted to the golden hue of late afternoon. Nora quickly freshened up, using the water in the basin to wash away the dust of travel. She smoothed her dress as best she could and attempted to tame her unruly auburn hair before heading downstairs. The smell of cooking led her to the kitchen, where Mrs. Porter was removing a large pot from the stove. The older woman smiled warmly when she saw Nora. There you are? Feeling better after your rest? Much, thank you, Nora replied. Is there anything I can help with? You can set the table if you like. Plates are in that cupboard there. Nora busied herself with the task, grateful for something to do. As she arranged the dishes, Yates entered, freshly washed and changed. Their eyes met, and a strange flutter stirred in Nora's chest. Sleep well? He asked. Yes, thank you. Your family is very kind to take me in like this. Yates told us a bit about your situation, Mrs. Porter said, stirring something that smelled deliciously of herbs and beef. That Thornton fellow sounds like a real snake. He is, Nora confirmed. And my father. She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of her parent despite everything. Some fathers forget that their job is to protect their daughters, not use them as bargaining chips, Mr. Porter said, entering the kitchen with Daniel. No offense to your pa, miss, but forcing a girl to marry is no better than selling her. None taken, Nora assured him. I've had similar thoughts myself. They gathered around the table, and Mr. Porter said a brief grace before they began passing dishes. The conversation flowed easily, with Daniel sharing a story about a stubborn calf that had them all laughing. Nora found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. After supper, they moved to the sitting room. Mrs. Porter brought out a quilt she was working on, while Daniel and his father played checkers. Yates motioned for Nora to join him near the window. We need to talk about what happens next, he said quietly. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, but eventually your father will widen his search. Nora nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. I had planned to take the train east, maybe find work in a larger city where they wouldn't think to look for me. That's one option, Yates agreed. Though starting fresh in a strange city with no connections is risky for a young woman alone. I don't have many alternatives, Nora pointed out. I can't go home, and I can't impose on your family indefinitely. Yates was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. There might be another way. I have a friend who runs a horse breeding operation in Wyoming Territory. He's always looking for skilled trainers. If you're as good with horses as you say. Hope flickered in Nora's chest. You think he would hire me? A woman. Jim's not one to care about such things. He judges people by their abilities, not their gender. Yates smiled. And Wyoming's far enough away that your father and Thornton would have a hard time finding you. It sounds perfect, Nora said, allowing herself to imagine a life where she could use the skills her mother had taught her, far from her father's control. I'll write to Jim tomorrow, Yates promised. In the meantime, you're safe here. For the next several days, Nora fell into the rhythm of life at the Porter Ranch. She helped Mrs. Porter with household tasks, grateful for the older woman's patient instruction when she encountered unfamiliar chores. In the afternoons, she often found herself in the company of Yates, who showed her around the property and introduced her to the horses they bred and trained. On the third day, while they were walking the fence line of the north pasture, Yates brought up a subject Nora had been avoiding. Your father must have noticed your continued absence by now, he said. Has he always been so controlling? Nora sighed, kicking at a stone in their path. No. Before my mother died, he was different, stern but fair. The drinking started after we buried her. Then the gambling. He started losing more than he won, and our ranch began to suffer. She shook her head sadly. When Thornton offered to clear his debts in exchange for my hand, I think my father genuinely believed he was doing what was best for both of us. That doesn't excuse it, Yates said firmly. No, it doesn't, Nora agreed. But understanding it helps me hate him less. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Nora found herself studying Yates's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was thinking. Tell me about your sister, she said suddenly. If you don't mind talking about her. Yates's expression softened with remembered grief. Emma was 2 years younger than me. Bright, stubborn, full of life. She wanted to be a teacher, had even started corresponding with a women's college back east. His voice grew harder. Then my father's cousin came to visit. He was a successful businessman from California, twice Emma's age, but charming. He convinced my parents that marriage to him would give Emma opportunities she'd never have here. And they agreed. They thought they were doing right by her. By the time we realized what kind of man he really was, the damage was done. Yates stopped walking, his gaze distant. That's why my parents didn't hesitate to take you in. They still carry the guilt of what happened to Emma. Nora reached out impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. It wasn't their fault. They were deceived, just as my father was. Yates covered her hand with his own, the touch sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The difference is, your father knew exactly what kind of man Thornton is. He chose his debts over your safety. The intimacy of the moment suddenly struck Nora, and she withdrew her hand, her cheeks flushing. Yates cleared his throat, resuming their walk as if nothing had happened, but Nora could feel something had shifted between them. That evening, as they gathered in the sitting room after supper, a knock at the door startled them all. Mr. Porter answered it, his hand resting casually near the gun belt hung by the door. Nora's heart pounded as she heard murmured voices, then relaxed when Mr. Porter returned with the telegraph operator's son. Message for Yates, the boy said, handing over a telegram. Pa said it seemed important. Yates tipped the boy and opened the message, his expression growing serious as he read. It's from Sheriff Adams in Silverdale, he said once the boy had left. Thornton and a group of men are searching the area for Nora. They've already been to 3 neighboring ranches. How did they know to look in this direction? Daniel asked. Someone must have seen us leaving town, Yates replied grimly. Or Tom might have broken under questioning. Mrs. Porter looked at Nora with concern. How much time do we have? Not much, Yates said. Sheriff Adams is sympathetic. He's seen what Thornton is capable of, but he can only delay them so long. I should leave, Nora said, standing up. I won't bring trouble to your door after all your kindness. Sit down, child, Mr. Porter said firmly. We're not turning you out to face those wolves alone. But they could be here by tomorrow, Nora protested. Then we need to move quickly, Yates said. I received a reply from Jim yesterday. He's willing to take you on at his horse farm, based on my recommendation. Wyoming is still 3 days hard ride, Daniel pointed out. She won't have to go that far, Yates said, his expression determined. There's another option, one that would stop Thornton in his tracks. Nora looked at him questioningly. What option? Yates met her gaze steadily. Marriage. A stunned silence fell over the room. Nora stared at him, certain she had misheard. Marriage? To whom? To me, Yates said simply. As a married woman, you would be under my protection legally. Neither your father nor Thornton could force you into another marriage. But that's, Nora sputtered, unable to form a coherent response. It's just a suggestion, Yates added quickly, looking somewhat embarrassed. You would still be free to go to Wyoming if you prefer. The job with Jim is yours either way. Mr. Porter cleared his throat. It's not a bad idea, strategically speaking. A marriage certificate would give you legal protection that running can't provide. It would be in name only, of course, Yates clarified, his ears turning slightly red. You would have your own room, your own life. When enough time has passed and the danger is gone, we could quietly seek an annulment if you wished. Nora's mind raced. The practical side of her could see the logic in what Yates was proposing. A legal marriage would indeed provide protection that flight alone could not. And yet, the idea of entering another arrangement where she had no choice felt too familiar. I need to think, she said, rising from her chair. Please excuse me. She hurried outside, needing the cool night air to clear her head. The porch swing creaked as she sat down, staring up at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Mrs. Porter stepped out. She sat beside Nora on the swing, not speaking at first, just offering her presence. He means well, Mrs. Porter said finally. But my son has always been better with horses than with words. Nora smiled faintly. It's a practical solution. Is that all you think it is? Mrs. Porter asked, her voice gentle. A practical solution? What else would it be? The older woman's eyes were kind, but knowing. I've seen the way he looks at you, Nora. Yates isn't offering marriage solely out of duty or strategy. Nora's breath caught. We barely know each other. Sometimes that doesn't matter. My husband proposed to me after knowing me just 2 weeks. Mrs. Porter patted Nora's hand. I'm not saying you should marry him. That's your decision alone. But don't dismiss it simply because it came unexpectedly. She left Nora to her thoughts, the porch swing gently swaying in the night breeze. Nora tried to sort through her jumbled emotions. Marriage to Yates would certainly solve her immediate problem. And he was kind, honorable, a man unlike any she had known before. But marriage? The very institution she had been fleeing? The door opened again, and this time it was Yates who stepped out. He approached cautiously, as if afraid she might bolt. May I join you? Nora nodded, making room on the swing. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic creaking of the chains. I apologize if my suggestion upset you, Yates said finally. It was presumptuous. No, Nora said. It was kind. But I can't ask you to sacrifice your future for my safety. Yates turned to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. It wouldn't be a sacrifice, Nora. You deserve to marry someone you love, she insisted. Not someone you're rescuing. What if it could be both? He asked quietly. Nora's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Yates took a deep breath. I know it's too soon to speak of love. We've known each other less than a week. But in that time, I've come to admire your courage, your kindness, your determination. I find myself wanting to know everything about you. That's not duty or pity, it's something else entirely. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. I've felt it too, she admitted softly. But I'm afraid. Not of you, but of making another choice that isn't really mine. That's why I want you to understand something, Yates said, taking her hands in his. If you choose to go to Wyoming, I'll help you get there safely. If you choose to stay and marry me, I'll honor and protect you for as long as you wish. But it must be your choice, Nora. Yours alone. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Nora felt something she had never experienced before, the true freedom to choose her own path. And with that freedom came clarity. If I were to say yes, she said carefully, Would it truly be a marriage in name only? Yates's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. It would be whatever you wanted it to be. I would never pressure you for more than you were willing to give. Nora studied his face, finding only sincerity there. And if, in time, I wanted it to be a real marriage in every sense. A smile touched his lips. Then I would be the happiest man in Colorado territory. The following morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Nora had made her decision, and once made, she felt a surprising peace about it. After breakfast, Yates rode into town to speak with the minister and obtain a marriage license, while the rest of the family prepared for what would be a very small, very hasty wedding. Mrs. Porter brought out her own wedding dress, a simple gown of cream-colored silk that needed only minor alterations to fit Nora's slighter frame. Daniel was dispatched to invite their closest neighbors, and Mr. Porter began preparing a special dinner to celebrate the occasion. As Mrs. Porter helped her with the dress, Nora voiced the concern that had been nagging at her. What if they arrive before the ceremony? What if Thornton tries to stop it? That's why we're doing this today, Mrs. Porter assured her. The sheriff's telegram said they were still at least a day's ride away. By the time they arrive, you'll be legally Mrs. Yates Porter. The simple word sent a flutter of nervous excitement through Nora's stomach. Mrs. Porter smiled knowingly as she pinned up Nora's hair. Having second thoughts? No, Nora said, realizing it was true. I'm nervous, but not uncertain. That's how it should be, the older woman said approvingly. Marriage isn't something to enter lightly, even under these circumstances. By early afternoon, Yates had returned with both the license and the minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews. A small gathering of neighbors had assembled in the Porters' front parlor, curious about the hasty wedding but supportive of the family they had known for years. Standing before the Reverend in Mrs. Porter's altered dress, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, Nora felt strangely calm. Yates, in his best suit, looked both nervous and determined as he took his place beside her. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Nora's "I do" came clear and sure. Yates's voice was equally firm when he made his own vows. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates leaned down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips there first. The small gathering celebrated with cake and punch, offering congratulations and well wishes. Through it all, Nora felt as if she were in a dream, the gold band on her finger the only tangible evidence that this new reality was actually hers. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving the family alone once more. Daniel winked at Nora as he headed out to check on the livestock. Welcome to the family, sister. The word warmed her heart. Family, something she had missed desperately since her mother's death. That night, true to his word, Yates showed her to her own room what had been his sister's. I'll be just down the hall if you need anything, he told her, his manner respectful. Thank you, Nora said. For everything. Yates reached out to touch her cheek gently. Get some rest. Tomorrow may be difficult if Thornton arrives. But Thornton did not arrive the next day, nor the day after. A week passed in relative peace, with Nora gradually settling into life as Yates's wife and a member of the Porter family. She began helping with the horses, discovering that Yates had been honest about his family's respect for her skills. Mr. Porter even asked her advice on a mare who was having trouble with a new foal, acknowledging her expertise without question. The relationship between Nora and Yates evolved slowly, built on growing trust and mutual respect. They spent their days working side by side, their evenings talking by the fire. Each night, he escorted her to her door with a gentle kiss, never presuming more, but each kiss lingering a little longer than the last. On the 10th day after their wedding, just as they were beginning to believe they might have escaped notice, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Daniel spotted them first from the barn roof, where he was making repairs. Riders coming, he called down. Looks like 5 or 6 men. Yates immediately moved to Nora's side, where she was working with a young colt in the corral. Go inside, he said quietly. Stay with my mother. Is it them? She asked, her heart racing. Probably. We'll handle this. Nora hesitated, then shook her head. No, I'm tired of hiding. I'm your wife now, legally and properly. Let me stand with you. Yates studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, but stay close to me. They walked together to the front of the house, where Mr. Porter and Daniel had already positioned themselves, rifles casually but visibly present. Mrs. Porter stood on the porch, her expression resolute. The riders approached slowly, and Nora's breath caught as she recognized her father at the head of the group, with Thornton riding beside him. For other men followed Thornton's personal guards, known for their willingness to use violence when needed. That's far enough, Mr. Porter called when they were still 20 yards from the house. The riders stopped, and Nora's father squinted against the sun. When he spotted her standing beside Yates, his face darkened with anger. Nora, what in God's name are you doing? Get over here this instant. Thornton, a heavy-set man in his 50s with cold eyes and an expensive suit, sneered. So this is where you've been hiding, girl. Time to come home and fulfill your obligations. Yates stepped slightly in front of Nora, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. My wife isn't going anywhere with you. A moment of stunned silence followed his words. Nora's father was the first to recover. Wife, he sputtered. What nonsense is this? She's promised to Mr. Thornton. Not anymore, Nora called back, moving to stand beside Yates rather than behind him. I'm legally married to Yates Porter. I have been for over a week. Thornton's face flushed with rage. This is some kind of trick. The girl was promised to me. We had an agreement, Patterson. It's no trick, Yates said calmly. We were married by Reverend Matthews in this very house, with witnesses present. The marriage certificate has been properly filed with the county clerk. Thornton turned on Nora's father. You said she was yours to give? That the papers were signed? They were, Mr. Patterson insisted, looking bewildered. She had no choice in the matter. She had every choice, Yates countered. And she chose me. Nora felt a surge of pride at his words. She stepped forward, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. Father, I'm sorry for your debts, but I won't pay for them with my life. I'm a married woman now, and you no longer have any claim over me. This is outrageous. Thornton bellowed. I want what I paid for. Then take it up with my father, Nora said coldly. I was never his to sell. One of Thornton's men moved his hand toward his gun, but Mr. Porter's rifle came up swiftly. I wouldn't, he warned. My land, my rules. And we don't take kindly to threats here. A tense silence fell. Nora could see her father's mind working, trying to find a way out of the situation. Finally, he slumped in his saddle. Thornton, it appears my daughter has outmaneuvered us both. This isn't over, Thornton growled. I want my money, Patterson. Every cent. You'll get it, her father promised. I'll sell the ranch if I have to. See that you do. Thornton turned his cold gaze on Nora. You've made an enemy today, girl. You and your new husband both. Are you threatening my family on my property? Mr. Porter asked mildly, though his rifle remained steady. Thornton's jaw worked, but he evidently thought better of pushing the issue. With a final glare, he wheeled his horse around. Come on, Patterson. We've got business to discuss. As they rode away, Nora's father glanced back once, his expression unreadable. Nora lifted her hand in a small gesture of farewell, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. He had tried to sell her to save himself, and yet he was still the father who had once taught her to fish and ride. When the riders were out of sight, Nora let out a shaky breath. Yates immediately put his arm around her shoulders. Are you all right? I think so, she said, surprised to find it was true. It's over, isn't it? Legally, yes, Yates said. Though I wouldn't put it past Thornton to try something underhanded. We'll be ready if he does, Mr. Porter assured them, lowering his rifle. Family protects its own. Family. The word filled Nora with warmth once more. She had gained far more than legal protection in this marriage. She had found a home. That evening, after supper, Yates suggested a walk. The summer twilight was long and gentle, the air fragrant with wildflowers and pine. They followed a path that led to a small stream at the edge of the property, neither speaking until they reached a fallen log that served as a natural bench. You were magnificent today, Yates said as they sat down. Standing up to your father and Thornton like that. Nora smiled faintly. I surprised myself. I've spent so long being afraid of them both. Fear has its purpose, Yates said thoughtfully. It keeps us alive. But there comes a point where you have to decide if surviving is enough. It's not, Nora agreed. Not anymore. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Nora gathered her courage for what she wanted to say next. Yates, she began hesitantly, when we married, you said it would be whatever I wanted it to be. He turned to her, his expression serious. I meant it. I know you did. And I'm grateful for the time you've given me to adjust. She took a deep breath. But I don't want a marriage in name only anymore. Yates's eyes widened slightly. Nora, are you certain? There's no rush. I'm certain, she said firmly. These past 10 days, working alongside you, getting to know you, I've never felt so respected, so valued. What began as an arrangement of convenience has become something else for me. Something real. Yates took her hands in his touch sending that now familiar warmth through her. It's been the same for me, he admitted. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wanting to make you smile, wanting to protect you, not because you need protection, but because you deserve to feel safe. Is that love? Nora asked softly. I think it's the beginning of it, Yates replied. Love that grows from respect and friendship seems more lasting than the kind that starts with passion alone. Although, Nora said, feeling suddenly bold, I wouldn't object to some passion as well. Yates laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering darkness. Neither would I, Mrs. Porter. Neither would I. He leaned forward, and this time when their lips met, there was nothing chaste about the kiss. Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing faster. Perhaps, Yates suggested, his voice husky, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Nora nodded, suddenly shy despite her boldness of a moment ago. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the stars beginning to appear in the vast Colorado sky. That night, for the first time, Yates did not escort Nora to her room and bid her good night. Instead, they entered his room together, closing the door on the world outside. What passed between them was tender and reverent, a beginning rather than an ending, a promise of all that was to come. In the weeks that followed, Nora truly became a part of the Porter family and ranch. Her skill with horses quickly proved valuable, and under Yates's encouragement, she began working more closely with the breeding program. By late summer, she had taken charge of training the yearlings, implementing techniques her mother had taught her years before. Word reached them that Thornton had indeed forced her father to sell their ranch to cover his debts. Mr. Patterson had reportedly headed west to California, a broken man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small bag of gold coins, all that remained of his once substantial holdings. Do you regret not helping him? Yates asked when they received the news. Nora considered the question carefully. I regret that it came to this. But he made his choices, just as I made mine. I can't take responsibility for his mistakes. Her relationship with Yates deepened with each passing day. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared work, and growing love. They developed their own routines and traditions, morning rides across the property, evenings reading aloud to each other by the fire, Sundays spent visiting neighbors or attending church in town. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves, Nora made an important discovery. The persistent morning sickness and unusual fatigue had a simple explanation: she was with child. When she shared the news with Yates, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness all crossed his face before he swept her into a gentle embrace. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. Are you happy? Nora asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. More than I can say, Yates replied, placing a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. This is a gift I never expected. The news delighted the entire Porter family. Mrs. Porter immediately began knitting tiny garments, while Mr. Porter set about designing and building a cradle. Daniel teased that the child would be riding before walking, given its parentage. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, bringing with it the visible evidence of new life, she often reflected on the strange path that had led her to this place. Had she not fled her father's house that spring morning? Had Yates not been in Silverdale at that precise moment? Had he not chosen to help a desperate stranger, how different her life would have been. One snowy afternoon in late January, as they sat by the fire in their private sitting room, a wedding gift from Yates's parents, Nora shared these thoughts with her husband. Do you ever think about how easily we might never have met? She asked, her hands resting on her now prominent belly. If you had been a few minutes later in town that day, if I had chosen a different hiding spot. Yates considered this, absently stroking her hair where her head rested against his shoulder. I believe some things are meant to be, he said finally. Not in a way that removes our choices, but in a way that creates opportunities for them. Like you offering me a choice when everyone else was trying to take mine away, Nora mused. Exactly. Yates placed his hand over hers, feeling the baby kick beneath their joined fingers. And look what that choice has created. In early March, as the first signs of spring began to appear in the Colorado mountains, Nora gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emma Hope Porter, honoring both Yates's sister and the emotion that had carried them through their unlikely beginning. Holding her daughter in her arms, with Yates looking on in wonder, Nora felt a completeness she had never known before. This was what freedom truly meant, not the absence of connections, but the presence of the right ones, freely chosen and deeply cherished. She's perfect, Yates whispered, gently touching the downy hair on their daughter's head. She is, Nora agreed. And she'll never know what it means to have no choice. We'll make sure of that. Yates pressed a kiss to her forehead. She'll know only love and respect, the freedom to choose her own path, just like her mother. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Porter family. Nora's training methods gained recognition throughout the territory, attracting buyers from as far away as San Francisco. Yates expanded their breeding program, focusing on horses that combined strength and intelligence traits he claimed to have learned to value from his wife. Word reached them occasionally about Thornton. His influence had waned after a series of poor investments, and the whispers about his treatment of his previous wives had grown too loud to ignore. The last they heard, he had moved to Texas, his fortune significantly diminished, and his reputation in tatters. Of Nora's father, there was little news. A letter arrived on Emma's first birthday, a simple note acknowledging his granddaughter's existence and expressing regret for past mistakes. Nora responded with a brief but kind letter of her own and a photograph of Emma. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. In the summer of Emma's second year, as Nora watched her daughter toddle after Yates in the garden, Mrs. Porter joined her on the porch. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" the older woman asked, following Nora's gaze to where Yates was showing Emma a butterfly. "If you had gone to Wyoming instead?" Nora smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach where, though she hadn't yet told anyone, she suspected a second child was growing. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. I think I would have found my way eventually. My mother raised me to be too stubborn for anything else. But this." She gestured to her husband and daughter, to the home and life they had built together. "This is where I was always meant to be. I just needed the freedom to choose it for myself." Mrs. Porter nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Some choices change everything." "Yes," Nora agreed, thinking of that desperate morning in Silverdale, of a cowboy who had smiled and offered her a different path. Some choices change everything. 2 years later, the Porter Ranch had expanded to include a dedicated horse training facility, with Nora overseeing a small staff of apprentices. Emma, now 4, had been joined by a brother, James, who at 2 was already showing signs of his mother's affinity for horses and his father's quiet determination. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when Nora had first arrived at the ranch, she and Yates stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. 5 years had passed since their hasty wedding, 5 years of building a life neither of them had imagined possible. "Do you regret it?" Yates asked suddenly. "Marrying me the way you did? We barely knew each other." Nora turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Why would you ask that now?" Yates shrugged, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "I was thinking about Emma today, how fiercely I would protect her right to choose her own path. And then I remembered how I proposed to you when you were desperate and afraid." "Yates Porter," Nora said firmly, taking his face in her hands. "You gave me a choice when everyone else was trying to take mine away. You didn't demand or pressure, you offered. And every day since then, you've honored that choice." He covered her hands with his own. "I just want to be worthy of the trust you placed in me." "You are," she assured him. "Every day, in 1,000 ways, you are." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, Emma showing her little brother how to make a crown of daisies. Nora smiled at the sight, then turned back to her husband. I chose you, she said simply. I choose you still. Every day. Yates pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. And I choose you, Nora Porter. Today and all the days to come. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had built together, Nora thought once more of that morning in Silverdale, of a desperate hiding place behind a water trough, of a stranger who had offered help with no expectation of return, of a choice freely given and gratefully taken. She had been told she had no choice in marriage. A cowboy had smiled and said she chose him. And in choosing him, she had found not just safety, but a love that grew stronger with each passing season, each shared challenge, each quiet moment of connection. It wasn't the future she had planned, but it was the one she had chosen. And in that choice had come a freedom greater than any she could have imagined, the freedom to love, to build, to become fully herself in the safety of a family that valued her strength as much as her softness. As darkness fell, and they called the children inside, Nora took Yates's hand and led him toward the house that had become their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new choices to make together. But tonight, in this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be, by the side of the man she had chosen, surrounded by the life they had built together, one freely made choice at a time.